Hello, the gray-haired hiker here. Thanks for joining me on this journey through some of the sights and scenery of Grand Teton National Park. Exploring Grand Teton has a way of grounding you in both the present moment and the long story that came before it. The sharp peaks, the calm lakes, the wide open valley, they all feel timeless, like they've been waiting patiently for you to wander through. It's easy to see why this place is considered one of the gems of the national parks. As you move along the trails, you can feel the park's long and proud history woven into the landscape, from the early homesteaders and ranchers who carved out a life here to the conservation efforts that protected these mountains for the future. You look around, take a breath, and realize you're walking through a place shaped by both nature and generations of people who cared deeply about it. The journey itself has its own personality, too. It nudges you toward people you never expected to meet, hands you stories you didn't plan for, and occasionally drops you somewhere you swear wasn't on the map 5 minutes ago. It's as John Steinbeck said, we do not take a trip takes us. All you can really do is show up, stay flexible, and let the trip do what it does best. That is to completely ignore your expectations only to give you something better. The Grand Tetons rose when a massive block of ancient rock lifted while the land to the east sank, forming Jackson Hole. Glaciers and weather then carved the uplift into sharp peaks and dramatic ridges that seemed to rise straight from the valley floor. The Shoshone people knew this skyline as Tiwana, meaning many pinnacles. In the early 1800s, French trappers added their own label to the three main peaks, Les Trois Tetons, or the Three Breasts. By the 1800s, white settlers had homesteads across Jackson Hole, and growing interest from climbers, conservationists, and travelers pushed for protection. In 1929, that effort created Grand Teton National Park, preserving the major peaks and the valley below. Today, the park reflects the meeting of geology, culture, and history, its mountains shaped by ancient forces, its stories by the people who lived beneath them. Grand Teton holds a small but striking group of alpine glaciers, remnants of the ice sheets that carved the range's sharp skyline. Today, about a dozen named glaciers remain, including Teton Glacier beneath Grand Teton's east face. Formed during the Little Ice Age, they sit deep in cirques and still shape the landscape through erosion and meltwater. Like glaciers worldwide, they are shrinking with clear retreat since the early 1900s. Even so, they feed streams, sculpt rock, and remain vivid reminders of the park's icy past and changing future. In 1898, William Owen, F.S. Spaulding, and ranchers Frank Peterson and Jack Sheave made the first verified ascent of the Grand Teton Peak via the route that now bears Owen's and Spaulding's names. Their climb later drew a challenge from Nathaniel Langford and James Stevenson, who claimed an 1872 summit, although their account matches that of another peak and not the Grand Teton. Yet another claim surfaced in 1899 when Captain Charles Kiefer told Owen that he, Private Logan Newell, and Private John Ryan had reached the summit in 1893. And adding to the early history, Paul Petzl made a notable ascent in 1924 at just the age of 16, hinting at the mountaineering legacy he would later build. A short trail over Cottonwood Creek leads to a modest cabin that has now been restored that was once owned by one of Jackson Hole's most remarkable residents. Geraldine Lucas arrived in the valley in her 50s, a single mother determined to build a life beneath the Tetons. Her simple homestead faced the mountains she loved, a daily symbol of her fierce independence. In 1924, at age 58, she climbed the Grand Teton with young Paul Petzl, becoming one of the earliest women to reach its summit. For her, the climb was one more example of the many obstacles she would conquer in her lifetime. And today, her cabin stands to honor a woman who met her challenges head on with courage and unshakable grit. Mormon Row sits on the open floor of Jackson Hole, where a handful of determined homesteaders carved out a life beneath the Teton Mountains. Beginning in the 1890s, Mormon families from Idaho settled the area in clustered farms, sharing labor, water, and community in a landscape that demanded cooperation. Their barns and houses, most famously the weather-worn Moulton barns, rose against the backdrop of the mountains, creating one of the most iconic scenes in the American West. Life there was tough. Long winters, short growing seasons, and isolation. Yet the settlers built irrigation ditches, tended hay fields, and raised family in the shadow of the peaks. When the land eventually became part of Grand Teton National Park, the homesteads were preserved, leaving behind a quiet, windswept reminder of resilience, faith, and the stubborn hope that drew people to this valley. The Chapel of the Transfiguration sits quietly near Moose, Wyoming, perfectly positioned to frame the Teton Range through its large picture window. Built in 1925 for the local ranching community, the simple log chapel turns the mountains themselves into its altar backdrop. Rustic and serene, it remains one of Grand Teton's most cherished historical sites, a small sanctuary shaped by and devoted to the surrounding wilderness. The Menor's Ferry rests on a calm bend of the Snake River, where William Menor built his cabin and a whitewashed general store after arriving in 1894, and later he was joined by his brother Holiday. From here he ran a cable-guided ferry that carried travelers across the river, charging 50 cents for a wagon and team and 25 cents for a horse and rider. A replica of the ferry now sits nearby, showing how the system worked. Menor sold the operation to Maud Noble in 1918, and she kept it running until a bridge replaced the service in 1927. Her nearby cabin later hosted a key 1923 meeting led by Yellowstone Superintendent Horace Albright, whose efforts helped inspire John D. Rockefeller, Jr. to form the Snake River Land Company and began purchasing ranch land, which would later become the national park. Noble's cabin, now a listed historic site, endures as a quiet reminder of the people whose choices helped secure the future of Grand Teton National Park. The Cunningham cabin stands alone on the sagebrush flats of Jackson Hole, one of the valley's earliest homesteads and a rare example of Appalachian log home construction carried west by settlers. Built in the 1880s by J. Pierce Cunningham, the cabin once anchored a hard-working ranching operation. Cunningham and his wife Margaret ranched here for decades, enduring harsh winters and short growing seasons. As pressures on the valley grew, Cunningham became one of the early advocates for protecting the land he had come to love. I found myself there alone in the mid-morning, silence broken only by the breeze moving through the grass and an occasional snort of a horse grazing nearby. My senses were completely taken by the tranquility and beauty of the place. My thoughts drifted to the hardship that once lived here, the difficulty, the labor, the relentless effort required for man and his wife to build a life on this land nearly a century and a half ago. The cabin itself carried their story. The hand-cut, carefully fitted joinery revealed the builder's skill and patience. The gray, weather-twisted grain of the logs told of the years of harsh conditions. Then I looked more closely at the photo, into the face of Mr. Cunningham, and in that moment it felt as though he leaned in and whispered, "When you love something and are devoted to it, it's not hard or uncomfortable. It fulfills you, and you'll have no regrets." Traveling around, you see every kind of RV and camping setup imaginable, but I really like the minimalist style of my Tacoma pickup and camper shell. It's got everything I need for dirt bagging, boondocking, and the occasional stealth camping, all while cruising comfortably down the highway. One afternoon at the Coulter Bay General Store, laundry tumbling, gear drying in the sun, I noticed another Tacoma parked beside me, this one sporting a pair of horns on the roof rack. Naturally, I had to strike up a conversation. The owner told me he'd been living out of his truck full time for a year while working trail maintenance in Yellowstone with the Conservation Corps. His setup looked a lot like mine, and we ended up laughing about how much we love our Tacomas. Honestly, we could have filmed a pretty convincing Toyota commercial right there in the parking lot. Of course, truck life has its surprises. One morning I discovered an uninvited guest tucked into my kitchen gear. I evicted him immediately and sent him on his way. No hard feelings, but he definitely wasn't on the guest list. Well, that pretty much wraps up the sites I wanted to talk with you about. Now we'll just roll some quiet music and hand it over to you with photos and videos of the scenery and wildlife. Hope you enjoyed the trip.